It's time to review Fire and Ice #4. Welcome to Smallville, Joanne Starer, Natasha Bustos. Sorry about that. I was not planning on reviewing this anymore after we did the first issue, Doc, but this latest issue was so bad, so bad that we had to come and revisit this bad boy.
I hate you, and I hate everyone that suggested we do this. I hate this comic for existing. I hate Joanne Starer for writing it. I hate Natasha Bustos for incompetently drawing it. I hate whatever editor greenlit this. And I hate Jim Lee for allowing DC Comics to continue to exist if this is the kind of shit that they are going to publish.
I don't know if I'm filled with that much hate, Doc, but there's no way that DC Comics can survive creators like this. They've been doing a lot of these stories. We just had Glenn from Comic Book Palace just basically eat 1,000 swords for going out there and speaking a lot of truth. But this is the kind of shit that he's talking about. And it's not just in little miniseries like Fire and Ice or Hawk Girl. We had Gotham Girl Interrupted in Detective Comics. We've had that backup story from Dan Parent where it's John Kent and Jay Nakamura just going on a date. And these aren't superhero stories. The art is never superhero art. There's not a whole lot compelling about them. And they're always just filled with some of the worst humor you will ever experience in your life.
There is not a single ounce of plot or logic or even reasons for anything to occur, except for, well, that's just what the next thing that came into my head was.
You know, DC Comics, despite having some better books than Marvel, like their lowest of the low is worse than Marvel nowadays, which is really strange. It hasn't happened for a long time. And their days are numbered if they can't get past stuff like that. What are we talking about? There is a plot. Well, I guess it's more of a theme to this comic book rather than a story. And the theme is Fire and Ice aren't getting along. They did something. Superman put them in a quarter called Smallville, told them that you're in timeout, and they're not getting along. And that is basically the entire premise, a story plot line of this comic book, while shenanigans, I guess, happen.
This is the ultimate version of And Then the comic. Outside of them just two besties fighting and not getting along, nothing here has sort of any sort of logical, coherent progression. It was just whatever the next thing that Joanne Starer had popped into her head, that was just going to be the scene for the next time that they either argued or ran away from each other to bitch about each other.
Superheroes not getting along is a tried and true plot element. It's a thing that you can build off of. Normally, there's a big threat that eventually they have to see eye to eye or forgive each other so they can meet that threat together and realize that they're better off together than apart and kind of get over their differences. But there's actually not one single page of action in this comic book, and there certainly isn't a villain or threat in it.
Yeah, the closest thing we got to a page of action is when Fire ends up trying to climb Lobo like a
sexually assaulting him.
Yeah, where she's just sexually assaulting Lobo and molesting him because she wants to bang him. Otherwise, it's just a bunch of people around each other and fighting or away from each other bitching. And then the background characters just making out for no apparent reason.
The worst shenanigan in this comic book, it's just so bad. It's hard to describe it, but for some reason, Ma Kent, Superman's mother, wants to get the two together so they can get over their differences. So she takes them to like the drag show in Smallville.
Suddenly, she's like the drunk suburban progressive mom that she lies to her husband about going to and makes a big deal about the fact that Smallville has a drag brunch.
The reason that this exists is so that Joanne Starer can take a traditional conservative old lady in comic books and put a flag in her head and say, look, we claimed her for our own. She's even into drag brunches, as if this would ever appeal to the character, and that's not Ma Kent. What it tells you about the author, Joanne Starer, she doesn't care about any of these characters. She doesn't care about the history, and this is why DC fucking comics fail time and time again, and why they'll never discover another audience, because this shit doesn't appeal to anyone. It's counted in the fucking dozens, man.
Absolutely, and I agree with you completely. The entire purpose of this whole scene here was to turn Ma Kent, to claim her as one of their own, to change her from the symbol of small town matriarch conservative values that influenced who Superman was, into progressive suburban drunk mom. That's what it is.
In the end, it turns out that Fire and Ice, their issues are irreconcilable at this point. And there's another girl that's really obsessed with Ice, I guess. And they start getting in a fight over who's going to be Ice's best friend, whether it's going to be Fire or this other girl. I think her name might be, I don't even want to remember. I don't remember her name, but she's got a short haircut. She clearly is a lesbian and would like to scissor Ice at the soonest possible moment. And so they end up having this big fight or whatever, and they get kicked out. And wouldn't you know it, the Rudy Poo lame-ass people of Smallville are doing a demonstration against having the drag brunch in town, exercising their constitutionally protected rights, as far as I know, to peacefully protest. And what do we get in here? Fire, who's a superhero, uppercuts her to the fucking moon and almost murders the lady. But we're supposed to believe the lady that really didn't do anything other than saying, we don't think you should have this here, and she almost kills her, is the bad guy.
Uppercuts her, knocks her across the fucking street, literally out of her shoes. And then Fire needs to make this big point of violence is the only language these people understand.
Because she's a bigot.
And apparently we're back to the speech is violence, but violence is speech.
Ice is supposed to be like the more level-headed one. She does not call the police. She doesn't call an ambulance. She doesn't even go and check on the lady to make sure that she's not dead, even though she got punched as hard as she possibly could in the face by a superhero. Ma Kent, whose son is literally fucking Superman, does nothing to help this woman. They're all just watching over and kind of being like, yeah, I think Fire did the right thing by punching a protester that really didn't do anything and potentially murdering her on the streets of Smallville. It's the weirdest fucking thing I've ever seen in a comic book.
But it is absolutely par for the course for crazy lefties writing comic books, because this is literally their power fantasy at this point. That is well within the realm of being a superhero, because this lady had opinions that she verbally expressed that were unacceptable to the superheroes. It justifies any amount of violence and or death towards this lady because she has quote unquote unacceptable opinions. I hate making these reviews about any sort of politics, but you can't get away from it in this fucking comic.
I would say that doesn't work for a DC superhero, doesn't work for Fire and Ice, certainly doesn't work for Ma Kent or any of that stuff. There are attempts at humor. We mentioned Lobo. Because Joanne Starer doesn't know anything about superheroes, the only thing that she could think of that Fire would want to do if she had the opportunity to do something would be to create a reality television show on YouTube to be an influencer. So now she gathered up all these villains and moved them to a cave. And I guess she's got them doing wacky hijinks, building sandwiches without their hands or whatever. And then Lobo shows up. And I guess this is supposed to be funny. I don't know why Lobo is in this comic book. It's kind of embarrassing that they would do this to the main man. But he shows up and he throws around the cat guy and was hoping he was full of candy. Then he picks up another guy whose brain is in his butt, I believe. And it was just lots of really stupid jokes before he is sexually assaulted by Fire.
Look, Lobo is there to be on the cover, to be Fire's eye candy. And because, hey, we're doing a contest that has a prize. Lobo's a bounty hunter. He will do anything for money. So bring in the guy that'll do anything for money. And then because he's buff, Fire's going to want to fuck him. And that's perfectly okay. And non-consensual touching is okay as long as it's done by a woman.
Lobo's such a cool character. You shouldn't be allowing someone like Joanne Starer really to touch Fire and Ice. Or most of these characters, certainly not a Jimmy Olsen or even Gorilla Grodd's trans sister. But certainly not a character as important that actually has a future at DC Comics and in the DCU for James Gunn. So yeah, that was pretty disappointing. Like I said, he's on the cover. He's really the reason that it's supposed to sell. And then we did have one thing happen at the end that was really strange. Fire walks into a room and two chicks are making out, literally for no reason. Doesn't serve the purpose of the characters that I know of, doesn't serve the purpose of the script or what little plot is there. I guess there really isn't a plot. But it was just there to have two girls make out because you got to have lesbian action in DC Comics these days.
You put this many women, because there's other than that guy in the wheelchair and Jimmy Olsen turning into a turtle, there are no men in this comic. Oh, well, there was that black guy that just said fierce whenever they were talking about going into the drag brunch. There are no men in this book. There's like 30 women. At least half of them must be lesbians, and they have to find a new excuse to make two of them pair up and start making out in every comic. They didn't even bother to come up with an excuse this time.
No.
The one lady that was one of the villains that was trapped in the cave and apparently being guarded by Crypto.
That was funny.
Yeah, that was funny. Look, the doggy's guarding everybody.
Well, he's wagging his tail.
Yeah, and he was wagging his tail because he's really happy. She just somehow gets out and decides, I'm just going to make out with this chick that thinks she works here. I'm pretty sure that lady's retarded, and you are taking advantage of a retarded person and should probably end up on a registry, lady. Hey, look, any excuse to just have random chicks making out. They haven't gotten to the point where Fire and Ice are going to realize that they are in love with each other. Fire's got to fuck Lobo before she realizes that she's actually in love with Ice. Ice has to make out with that short-haired chick before she realizes that she's a better couple with Fire.
That does feel like the inevitable conclusion to Fire and Ice Welcome to Smallville, and likely the only reason that the comic book exists.
Yeah, it's a
to
really
make them mechanically a couple.
It's a convoluted, pointless, and exhausting way to make them both decide to be a couple in a way that it can't be walked back easily by anybody else.
I'm not the biggest fan of Fire and Ice Welcome to Smallville #4. I didn't plan on coming back to the series, but this issue in particular was bad enough that I thought we had to check it. I'm not going to put my seal of approval on this comic book, and I cannot, in good conscience, recommend this to the viewers of the channel or really recommend this to anybody. Like, even if you're really into LGBTQ and pride, I do not believe that this is going to be the comic book for you. If you like YA graphic novel stuff, I don't think you'll like this either. If you like slice of life comic books, I say go read manga and skip this stuff. It sounded like you were a little bit more optimistic on this comic book and a little bit more accepting of some of the story elements in here. Are you going to wholeheartedly recommend Fire and Ice Welcome to Smallville?
I'm going to recommend that this thing gets... You know what? I'm not even going to recommend that we throw this into the sun. I am going to recommend we put this up on a billboard. Never, ever fucking do this. And this needs to be a litmus test. If you think that this is a good book, you need to be thrown into the sun.
That does it for this week's Unfiltered, Doc. And we've got another 2 hours of the Q&A that we're going to record in the not too distant future. Been enjoying all this stuff. We got an extra, 3 hours every single week of Doc on the Patreon, as well as another 2 hours of Aaron Sparrow talking all the pop culture and comic news, all that kind of stuff. And then another 2 hours of Jim, where we talk about all the new comic books every single week on Thursday. Not a hotter place to be in comic books than the Patreon at Thinking Critical. And starting next year, we're going to be doing reviews of Miller World issue 1 all the way to Big Game. And we're going to do the entire series of Planetary before we find something else to do. That'll take us a half a year. A lot of stuff popping on the Patreon.
Absolutely. Dude, it is the best deal in Patreon right now. That Doc is Right tier. You get 7 hours of additional content every single week in, week out. 3 of me, 2 of Aaron, 2 of Jim. Jesus Christ. I mean, hell, you could give Jim a 3rd hour and barely scratch the surface of what you could talk about. And I guarantee you could be a lot smarter listening to another 2 or 3 or 5 hours of Aaron Sparrow every week, because he makes people smarter. Now, granted, I just kind of make people dumber. So
they offset.
It kind of offsets. Yeah. Go for it. Check it out. I cannot wait for this Planetary reread. I am not involved. I hope that I can claim that I had some influence in getting you to finally break down and read it, but I am absolutely going to read along with you guys because I can't fucking wait.
Yes, you shamed me into doing this Planetary thing, and I'm excited for it. So it's 100% you, Doc.
Absolutely. And hey, guess what? John Cassaday's art on Planetary, whole hell of a lot better than that shitty fucking variant he's doing for X-Force coming up, because that looks shitty.